Okay. All right. Being live streamed. Okay. So we're going to get started. Last week, we did a lot of stuff with Ramat Valley, and I got almost up to the end of the part of the story that we had read. The last little bit is that I hadn't really had a chance to discuss was on verse 12, the whole issue of where is Daniel. Now, we heard that Ramat Valley suggested that Daniel was also there and was also thrown into the fire, and that's a little confusing because he's never mentioned by name in the story. And so I wanted to bring you a couple of other possibilities. All right, we're going to share this screen and we're going to look. So where we actually, the verse that we're actually dealing with was when the Malshinim, the gossipers, came to the king and, intimated and reminded him that he'd made this decree and there were these three men who were responsible to follow the decree using their bodily names, Shadrach, Meshach, Abednego, and they didn't. That's interesting, right? They say three different things about that. One is, first, ahead of time, they were called Jews, Yehudim, and that you, the king, had appointed them. Now, had the king appointed them? Actually, Daniel had appointed them, but the king had agreed to their appointment over all the work of Medinat Bavel. And why is that important? Because we pay close attention to how the story was going. Nebuchadnezzar was calling all of the pashas and all of the chashdarpanim and all of the skanim and all of the gizbarim and all the different kinds of officers that there were that were appointed over cities and over provinces and over various institutions, governmental institutions. And so because Hanani, Mishael, and Azariah had been appointed to those kinds of positions, they were also required to show up for the first meeting when they were told what to do. They were also required to show up for the second time right before the big fanfare, required to fall on their faces, and they didn't do any of those things. Or it's not clear. Maybe they came and they heard the first announcement and said, okay, this is really not for us, but they certainly didn't come the second time. So the question is, why are they called Yehudaim, and what does it mean to be called a Jew? Right? That's where our word Jew comes from, is Judah, Yehuda. So we often are told that Yehuda comes from the language of Hodaya, of giving thanks, that acknowledging and giving thanks to Kadosh Baruch Hu. Certainly when we go back to the story of Leah, when we see why it was that Yehuda merited to the Malchut, it was because he was able to do tshuva, because he was able to acknowledge where he had gone wrong. What a wonderful definition of what it takes to be a leader, is somebody who can acknowledge that they've gone wrong. And that's what Yehuda means. So there are actually two different reasons given by the Mefarshim, and there's a very lovely Gemara about what it means to be a Jew. So the Malbim says this business, because now what are the next three things? So the next three things, he does the whole verse altogether. Okay, so he says, And who are these people? These people, Guraya Ilach, Lo Samu Alach Malka Te'em. They didn't Lo Sam Lev Lacha. They didn't pay attention to you. Okay. Lalahach la pachin, and to your gods they don't worship. Ulitzelem dahava di hekemta la sagdin, and to this statue of gold that you erected, they did not bow down. The implication being, okay, they're Jews. They don't worship your God. They worship their own God. It's their God. It's their religion that's interfering with their ability to obey your commandments. So that's one way to understand it. Okay. And so by calling them Jews, it like sets this up. This is how the Malbim explains this verse. The Ramadvali says it a little differently. Okay, the Ramadvali said that calling them Jews, right, was to try to get, not just to try to get them in trouble. He said that to call them Jews at the beginning was to say that they were from the exiles. They aren't long-term members of your empire. They're not costume like you are, like we are. Okay? They're these Jews. They aren't really worthy of any kind of honor, not any kind of kavod. And not only that, but they're ungrateful, like exactly the opposite of what the name Yehuda means to us, right? What the name Yehuda means to us is somebody who can show gratitude, who can acknowledge. And B'dafka, the implication that these gossip mongers were trying to give, according to the Ramad Valley, is that they don't live up to their name. They're, you would think you kept them alive, you've given them a position, right? They're Jews, they're the lowest of the low, they're slaves, they're the exiles. You appointed them to high position, and they don't pay attention to you. They are unwilling to blend in, to worship your God. Clearly, your God beat their God, right? So the Ramat Valley gives us a very different understanding of why the gossip mongers organized their words this way. Gemara in Megillah quotes, I'm going to bring it up right here. The Gemara in Megillah quotes Rabbi Yochanan. And Rabbi Yochanan says, they came from Binyamin. Okay, we've seen back in chapter 1, I had brought you, there were two different ideas. One was when it said that they were Zera Malchut, so one idea was that they were all from Yehuda. Okay, and the other was that only Daniel was from Yehuda, and that the other three were from Binyamin, which makes sense. That could still be Zera Malchut, by the way. It would just be that they were somehow descended from Shaul's family, or wider range of relatives. We know, of course, that Mordechai was a descendant, that Zera Melucha from Binyamin. So Rabbi Yochanan was of the opinion that Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah were not from the tribe of Yehuda, rather they were from the tribe of Binyamin. And so in that case, why were they called Yehudim? Yehudim should only apply to people who are descended from the tribe of Yehuda. Okay, and he has an answer. And his answer is al shum shekafar ba'avodah zarah, because they. So normally we think of a kafir as somebody who denies Chas v'shalom, Lalena, right, denies God, the heretic. But here, they were heretics towards Avodah Zarah. They were believers in HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and they were heretics towards Avodah Zarah. They denied any possibility of worshiping anyone other than God. And Rabbi Yochanan goes on to say that Kol HaKofer B'Avodah Zarah Nikra Yehudi. Any human being who denies Avodah Zarah can be called Yehudi, can be called a Jew. As it's written here in our verse, okay, he's using our verse as his proof text for this. Itai Guvrin Yehuda. There were these Jewish men, these Yehudim men, who refused to bow down, who refused to do the act of Avodah Zarah. And so this is the first place that we see the word Yehudim. I had originally made a note saying that to call all Jews Yehudim, but I think in some way, what Rabbi Yochanan is saying is stronger than that. And he's saying it doesn't necessarily just apply to Yisrael, that any human being who denies Avodah Zarah and attaches himself to Kadosh Baruch Hu can, in some sense, be called Yehudi. Not necessarily B'nai Yisrael, but can be called Yehudi. Very interesting. All right. So that was the first thing that I wanted to go through with this. And the other thing is that we got to this point and said, and just why are these gossip mongers only bringing up Shadrach, Meshach, Abednego? Why are they only bringing up Hanani, Mishael, and Azariah? Why are they not bringing up Daniel? Where is he? Okay, so I'm not going to open up the Malbim for you to see it, but the Malbim has an answer. Okay, and his answer is, like I said, that exactly sort of the flip side of why it was important for the gossip mongers to insinuate this business about dimanita yaton al abidat not bava, that you appointed them to be over this work of the state of Bava. All right, they're the officers in charge. So they're covered in your decree. Now, Daniel was actually not appointed to that kind of position at all. Daniel was appointed to be the chief advisor and the head chacham, as it were. And all of the, like he's the head of the intelligence department, let's say, but he's not an officer over a particular country or particular language, a particular city, and so, or province or anything like that. And so maybe, and this is the Malbim's suggestion, so maybe he was exempt. All right, that was the Malbim's suggestion. Ramat Valley, we heard, had already suggested that he was also there. He also refused to bow down. Maybe he also got thrown into the fire. It's not, that's so not in the verses, but okay. And the Chidah brings, I actually found the Gemara through a different source, but the Chidah, if you go to read his parish, the Chidah brings the parish from the Gemara. And I'm just going to switch over to the different tab because I have that open for you already. And it's here. I'll make it a little larger. Okay. So the Gemara, this is actually in Sanhedrin. And the Gemara there in Sanhedrin, by the way, has a couple of pages that talks about this particular chapter of Sefer Daniel. And this is, and it sort of does it out of order, like answering the questions in an order that made sense to the Gemara, but it's not necessarily in the order that it's presented in the verse. And it's not necessarily answering it in the order that we asked our questions. So near the end of it, they finally get around to asking the question, Daniel, lehecha nazal, where did he go? Like, why wasn't Daniel in this story? And so now we're going to hear there are a variety of different opinions. Amar Rav, Lemicha Nahara Rava B'Tveria, and there's a different girsa that says Lemicha Nahara Rava B'Tura. So either he went to dig out some kind of waterworks, I don't know, some kind of, to bring water from the Kinneret. That's the Yama de Tiberia, right? And he's digging out a river type thing, or maybe he's clearing the silt out of the entrance to the Jordan River. It's not clear which great river he's talking about. And that's if it's B'Tveria. If it's Naharava B'Tura, then it really doesn't mean a river. It means he went to supervise the digging out of a big tunnel, right? Like a minhara, a big tunnel in the mountain. But either way, he was in Eretz Yisrael, of all places, according to the first opinion anyway. And he had been sent there to oversee some big engineering project. That's the first opinion. Second opinion is Shmuel said he went Latuye Bizra Aspasta. Okay, he went to bring the seed of this particular kind of a vegetable or whatever. There was a very choice kind of it, and he'd been sent on an expedition to find where it came from so that they could bring it to Bavel and grow it themselves. The third opinion is our same Rabbi Yochanan that we heard from just before, and he says, "La'tuye chazire d'Alexandria shel Mitzrayim," to bring the pigs of Alexandria in Mitzrayim. So evidently, the Egyptian pigs or the Alexandrian pigs were known for something. I don't know. Either they were really cute, or they were, presumably very tasty, or it's not 100% clear to me at any rate what all it is. And it's also, to be very honest, something quite asynchronous, because we just saw in that dream that the head of gold referred to Bavel, that the upper body and arms of silver referred to Prasumadai, to Persia and Media, that the abdomen and upper legs of brass referred to Yavan, referred to Greece. That's Alexander. There's no city called Alexandria until after there's an Alexander Mokdon. And that isn't until the time of the second Beit HaMikdash. It's for sure not at the time of the destruction of the first one. So you have something here in the Gemara, admittedly, which is out of order temporally, as we would normally think of it. But nonetheless, it could be that this type of pig that was grown there around Alexandria already existed in that same area, and that Rabbi Yochanan was calling it according to the place names that he knew about, and he wasn't concerned with giving us a history lesson about what it was called in the time of Nebuchadnezzar. So we can make sense out of that. And then the Gemara asks a question, which gets asked actually in a couple of other places as well, but it's like, Ini, is that really possible? Tanya, we're taught elsewhere that Todos Harofe, Todos was a Jew who had a Greek name. Todos the Rofe, Amar ein para v'chazira yotzei me'Alexandria shel Mitzrayim she'ein chotchin ha'em shala b'shvil shelo telet. Shelo telet. Okay, and by the way, I understood what I said. Let me explain it in English, and then I'll do my by the way. So we have a Braita, which is something that's not actually in the Mishnah, but it's from around the same time as the Mishnah. Todos HaRofei, the Dr. Todos was a contemporary of, he's before Rebbe by a bit, and he gave testimony to help Chazal figure out certain halachic issues that they needed to know about. And one of the things that he told them is that they never exported either their pigs or their cattle without destroying the womb of the female animals in order that they can't give birth elsewhere, because they were trying to protect their monopoly. And the same thing was true, and this is my sort of by the way, the same thing was true about the type of horses called Arabian horses, that they wouldn't allow them to be exported unless they had neutered them. So it's a practice of the Middle East for thousands of years now. And so again, whether it was an engineering project or whether it was to smuggle seeds to track down the seeds for a particular crop that they thought would be well suited, or whether it was, so the answer is yes, in fact, Daniel was going to do this, and it says, Zutre aiti below dataihu. He brought little ones. In other words, he managed to smuggle out some piglets that without the knowledge of the Egyptians. All right, but either way, it sounds like he was sent on some big mission, and so he wasn't anywhere nearby. He wasn't anywhere near Emek Dura, the Valley of Dura. All right, Tanu Rabbanan. So the rabbis teach that there were three. There were three partners who all had the same counsel. Who were they? The three were HaKadosh Baruch Hu, Daniel, and Nebuchadnezzar. Okay, HaKadosh Baruch Hu said, "Nizel Daniel mehacha delo lemru b'zchutei itnatzel." Let's get Daniel out of there, in order that people shouldn't say that it was in his merit that they were saved. In other words, that Hanani, Mishael, and Azariah were saved. HaKadosh Baruch Hu knew that they were going to stand the test, and he knew that he was planning on saving them. And he didn't want people assigning the merit to Daniel. He wanted us to be able to see that the merit came from that Mesirut Nefesh. Okay, so we're going to hear about that today once we get going into the rest of the verses. But I want to just still clean up this idea of like, where was Daniel in all this? So what about Daniel? What was it Daniel's idea? Daniel said, I'm going to get out of here. There's a verse from Devarim, Psile Elohehem Tisrafun Be'esh. He doesn't, and So what does that mean? So you have to read the Mefarshim. Like, why wouldn't you want to help fulfill the verse that says that the statues of their gods will be burnt in fire? And the answer is, and it's a little further down, actually. Oh, no, it's not actually. All right. So it is a little further down. I take, it's not a little further down. It was in one of the Mefarshim on this verse, is that what was Daniel's issue? Daniel's concern was that Nebuchadnezzar had bowed down to him. And now there's going to be all this business about burning people in the fire and this and the other. And he was afraid that, these statues, that their gods, their false gods, would be burnt in the fire. And he didn't want to be, because Nebuchadnezzar had treated him as a god, okay, which is explained in this little bit down here. He was afraid that the verse would come true by his ending up getting burnt. And so he didn't want any part of that. And so he decided to find himself some kind of mission to get him out of the way while Nebuchadnezzar was doing all this stuff with the statue and everything else. And Nebuchadnezzar also was of the opinion that it would be a good idea for Daniel not to be in Babel at the time that he's doing this. And he said, Amar Yezel Daniel, let Daniel go mehacha from here. Dela lemru kale le'alokea benura. That nobody should say about him, about Nebuchadnezzar, that he burnt his own gods in the fire, because he knew, what did he know? He knew that Daniel would not bow down. He didn't know that about Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. He knew for sure about Daniel, all right? And he didn't want to burn Daniel up. And B, because, right, and this was the issue. I mean, how do we know that he treated Daniel as his God, right? Desagidle, because it's written, this was a verse we heard in chapter 2, Badain Malcha Nebuchadnezzar Napal out on Poihid Daniel Sagi, that he fell on his face before Daniel and he prostrated himself, etc. Okay, so the opinion in the Gemara is that Daniel had been sent on a mission, and that HaKadosh Baruch Hu was perfectly ready there to try to, to like place the idea that Daniel should be sent on a mission, to arrange for Daniel not to be there. Daniel himself saw what was coming as Nebuchadnezzar was getting ready to build this statue. And when he couldn't convince him otherwise, he found he had a good idea that it would be better for him to not be anywhere near there. And Nebuchadnezzar himself really didn't want Daniel to be there. So Daniel, with all three of the major players, as it were, in the story, doing their thing, Daniel gets sent away. Okay, so that closes up what we've done up until now. And so now we're going to do as much as we can for the continuation of the story. And then if there's hashkafa and pnimiut and sod and whatever to go with this part, we'll address it at the beginning of class next time. But here's going to see what we can do about finishing off the story that's in chapter 3. B'dai Nebuchadnezzar birgaz v'chama amar v'hataya l'shadrach meshach v'abednego. So he's had these gossip mongers show up, and he is angry, right? Rogus is a similar word in Hebrew. Chema is like burning anger. And he said to bring them before him. And then these men were in fact brought before the king. Okay. And then Nebuchadnezzar, he raises his voice and he says to them, Hatzda, Shadrach, Meshach, Abednego, Lalaka, La Itechon Palchin, Ulatzelem Dahava Di Hikimet La Sagdin. They've told me that you guys don't worship my gods and that you did not bow down to this statue of gold that I had erected. So then he says to them, Kan, now, Hein itechon atidin di beidna di tishmaun kal karna mashro. Getting the whole list again. Mashrokita, katrol, shabcha, psantrin, symponia. Okay, v'kol zane zimra, tiplim v'tiskadun l'talma di'abdi. So if you tell me that the next time that you'll hear the voice of the horns and the mashrokita or some other kind of a wind instrument, and the katros shabcha is some kind of a like drum, and the psantrin, it's not clear. It's not a piano like we have pianos, but I was reading in Steinsaltz, and he brings like about 5 different possibilities for symphonia, etc., and all these different kinds of musical instruments that you will fall down and you will prostrate yourselves to the statue that I caused to be made. The continuation of that, it's like, if you'll do this, and all of the Mefarshim say, Mutav l'chem, that'll be good for you. Okay, fine. Then we'll ignore the fact that you didn't do it this time when you should have. But as long as the next time you'll do it, it's all good. V'hein latis gadun be pshata titramin b'go atu nura kirta. And if you will not bow down at that time, you will be thrown into the fiery furnace. Umanhu ela di yeshezvin kron minyade. And who is a God who has the ability to save you from my hand? Wow. Okay. So they answer him. No, Shadrach, Meshach, Abednego. Still using their Bavli names. But Amrin Lamalka, they answer Nebuchadnezzar. And they don't even call him king. They just call him by his name, Nebuchadnezzar. La chashchin anachna al dana pitkam lahatavutach. We don't need to delay or consult or think about how to answer that which you have said. Hein itai alakana dianachna palchin yachil shezavutna. Behold, there is a God, our God that we worship. He has the ability to save us. Min atu nura kirta, from the fiery furnace, umin yadach Malcha, and from your hand, O king, Yesheziv, he can save. There's not going to bring you the full Gemara stuff, but I'll tell you that in Masechet Tanit, there's a discussion about this, because you're not allowed to be somech al hanes. Not supposed to, to rely on a miracle. And in fact, they say that if you do rely on a miracle, then it doesn't work. Okay. That miracles only happen, as it were, when you're not looking for them. So So then they ask about this because we know the story, right? There's about to be a big miracle. So why, what are they saying here? And Chazal over there in Masechet Tanit answered that what they're saying is that God has the power to do it. Whether he chooses to or not, that's not in our hands. But we know he has the power to do it if he wants to. You're asking, who is the God? We know who the God is who could do this. But we're willing to be Moser Nefesh regardless. He can save us. He doesn't save us. It doesn't matter. We're not bowing down to this tell. And we don't need to think about it twice or three times. We can answer you right now. Vehen la yedil lehave la. Excuse me, go ahead.
Would you just translate again, Pasuk Yud Zayin?
Hen itai alakana dianachna palchim. Behold, this is like yesh. Later on in Aramaic, it becomes ika, or else just eat. There's eat and late. Yesh v'ayin, and sometimes we have ika v'leka, depending on the context. All right. This is an earlier Aramaic, and it's itai, and they don't even have, and we'll see a little bit later on, it's going to be la itai instead of leka, which is the sort of conjunction of them or the conflation of them. They don't have a separate word for ein or for ein. They have itai, yesh, and they have la itai, lo yesh. There isn't. Okay? Kana, our God, dianachna palchim, that we worship. Okay? Yachil l'shei zavutana. He has the power, yachil, yacholet, l'shei zavutana, that shor, shin zayin vet, means lahatzil, or lahoshia, or it's used sort of as a stand-in for any of the salvation, geula kinds of words. And then the Tana, us. Min atu nura yukidata. I've been translating this whole thing since sometimes it says gu atu. The gu is like into the toch. But atu nura yukidata is the fiery furnace. Nura is fire. Yukidata is that's. We use the word to mean to light something up, I don't have the English word for it. I can do it in Hebrew. I can't do it in English. To ignite something that's burning brightly. Okay, this yikidata. Umin yadach. Umin yadach malka yesheziv, and from your hand, O king, yesheziv. So I said he can save because I'm translating it. I was translating yesheziv. I was translating it together with that Gemara from Tanit in mind. That yesheziv, not he will save, but he can save.
Okay.
That he has the power, and it's his choice whether he's doing it or not, because that's how Chazal understood it. Right. So I was forcing my English translation to match the story, but to match Chazal. But that's why I brought what Chazal had said when I did it. And then the next verse is Vehen la yedia lehave lach malka, and now it's. Wasn't la yedia lehave lach malka di lelahach la itena palchin uletelin dehava di hikimta la niskud. So now, don't you know? Okay, while you are the king, but that we are not going to worship. We're not coming to worship your gods, and we are not going to bow down to the statue of gold that you erected. Okay, so yep, you're the king. We understand that, but we're not going there. And we're not going to do that. And so they are at that point, Moser Nefesh, although the phrase later on is Moser Guf in the text. Okay. Bedain, Az. Okay, that's that Aleph Dalet Aleph Zayin, Az, Azai. Nebuchadnezzar hitmelichem Utzlem an Pohi Ishtane al Shadrach Meshach Abednego. Then Nebuchadnezzar became filled with this burning anger, and the image of his face changed towards Shadrach. Like he, think of somebody with the apoplexy became purple sort of thing, right? Towards them. And he raised his voice and he said, Lemeze la'atuna chad shiv'a al di chaze lemeze. He told his other servants to go stoke the furnace 7 times what it should be, what it's ru'ui to have. So if you put in 7 times as much, you're lucky if you don't cause the thing to blow up in your face. Clay furnaces and even other kinds of furnaces, like there's a reason why there's how much it's appropriate to have. But he was so angry, he wasn't willing for it to just be a normal furnace. He wanted it 7 times as much. Okay. Well, Gufrin Ibare Chaya di Bechaile Amar Lakapata Lashadrak Meshach Abednego Lemirmai Laatu Nura Yikirta. And to the men who were his bodyguard, the officers of his court, whatever sort of like the bailiffs, whatever, he said to that who were in his troop right there by him, he said to them to bind, to bind Shadrach, Meshach, Abednego in order to throw them. The Lamed Mem. It's actually interesting because here there isn't a mem, but I also think that kapata may be a different form of, it's an infinitive, but I think it's a different binyan. For the simple binyan, for the ka binyan in Aramaic, we have a lamed mem at the beginning of the infinitive, and then the 3 letters of the shorash. And the Reish Mem Aleph means so basically it means lahashlich, to throw them into. So it does not mean, interesting, because Reish Mem Aleph, hey, whatever you might think means like Rome, like Yaharim, but it doesn't. It means lahashlich into this fiery furnace. So that's the next bit of the scene. So he's given them a chance, which he did not need to do, by the way. All right. He did not need to give them a chance. His original decree had been that anybody, particularly anybody of the officers, governors, et cetera, who don't bow down is going to be thrown into the fiery furnace. He didn't need to give them another chance. He chooses to do that. When they turn him down, he becomes even more enraged, and he decides to have the furnace superheated, and he assigns people to bind them, not just to take them struggling and throw them in, but to bind them up so that you're like throwing them in like additional logs into the furnace. Kol kavel dana. Now, kol kavel dana is an expression You cannot translate it word by word because then you don't come up with the same meaning as the expression. The expression basically means l'nochach or l'umatzeh, basically around that same. So basically in this case, like at the same time, okay. Min di milat malka mechatzpa va'atuna eze yatira. So according to the word of the king, and according to his desire, the furnace was I can't speak English. The furnace was overstoked, let's say. Okay, that's that yatira. It was overfilled with fuel. And guvraya ilech di hasiku l'Shadrach, Meshach, va'Abednego katel kimon shviva di nura. And the people who had lifted up Shadrach, Meshach, va'Abednego in order to kill them, who had lifted them up, they were killed. Katol himun. They were killed by the shviva nura, by the sparks of fire that came out. When they opened up the furnace to throw these three guys in, the sparks of fire flew out at them and killed them, people who were trying to carry out the king's wishes. Now, far be it from me to question Hakadosh Baruch Hu, how you're making your miracles, but it seems to me that if you do that, you could also have had the fire burn off their shackles and let them stand there and go free right there. But that's not how it works. Instead, Guvraya ilech tlatehon Shadrach, Meshach, va'Abednego nafalu lugo atunura kida makaptin. So these three men, the three of them, Shadrach, Meshach, va'Abednego, okay, Hanani, Mishael, Azariah, fell into, that's that lugo, latoch, the fiery furnace, and they were still bound up. Okay, so dun 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 dun. That's where that part of the story ends. There's this pay here. That's the action. And now what's going to happen? So, it's a fire. It's so hot that just the flames shooting out of it kill people. That should be the end of the story, right? And which I think is why that pay is there. Is that wasn't the end of the story. Adai Nebuchadnezzar Malka Tve. So then Nebuchadnezzar, the king, was astonished, like Tohe, or Tmiha, right? V'kam b'hit bahala, and he got up in astonishment and not knowing what the heck was going on. Anev Amar lahadavrohi, and so he said, the hadravrohi, we haven't heard about them before. It's a great word. It's those who get to speak to him. They're his kitchen cabinet, as it were, his cronies, the ones who have the right to speak to him whenever. That's lahadavrohi. Okay. Hello, Guvrin Tlata Ramena? Lugonurad, wasn't it 3 men that I had thrown into the furnace, into the fire? Makaftin, and they were bound? Means they answer him and they say, Lamalka, to the king, Yetziva Malka, it's true, O king. Yetziva, like Emet v'Yetziv in our tefillah. It's true, O king. Okay, later on, they don't use the word Yetziva for true, they use Kushta. But in this Aramaic, at the time of Daniel, they were using the word Yetziva. Anevamar. So he spoke up and he said, Ha'ana chaze guvrin arba, but I see 4 men, not 3, 4. There are 4 people. Shrayim mahalchin b'go nura, v'chava lo ite b'hon. And they're, like they're just hanging out there and they're walking around inside the fire, and there's no chaval, like chablan, like there's no nezik. La itai, right? Lo yesh. Okay. We would say ein behem. There's no nezik there. They're not being hurt by this at all. And the image, what I see, right? The image, the mar'eh of the 4th one is similar to Ben Elokim, meaning an angel. I think I'm going to try to do something. We're going to talk a little bit about this in particular. Who the heck is this angel? Next time. There are arguments as to whether it's Gabriel or whether it's Michal and what the 2 different things mean, etc. And so we'll talk about that next year. Bedayin karev Nebuchadnezzar litra atu nura yekirata. So then Nebuchadnezzar came close to the opening, the petach or the sha'ar, probably not a sha'ar, but to the opening of the furnace. And Anav Amar speaks up and he says, Shadrach, Meshach, Abednego, Avdohi di Elaka ilah, servants of the Most High King, Puku va'etu, come out and come to me, and come here, right? Go out, in other words, out of the furnace and come to me. Nafkin, Shadrach, Meshach, Abednego, Mingo, Nura. And so then the 3 of them came out from inside the fire. Umitkanshin, Achash Darpnaya, Signaya, Pachvata, Vahadavre Malka. So then they didn't list off all of the different kinds because like the word for the Gizbarim, etc. aren't there, but 3 of the types of officers that we had listed several times already in this chapter, and also now this 4th kind that we just heard about, the ones who get to speak to the king, his cronies. Chazayin l'guvrayan, they look at these people, Ilaich, the meaning Hanani, Mishael, Nazaria, Dila Shalit Nura Begesh Mahon, that the fire didn't have any rule over their bodies. Usaara Shehon Lo Hitchrach, and that the hair on their heads wasn't even singed. Usarbelehon Lo Shno, and their cloaks, which by the way, their cloaks were used to bind them, but now they're wearing their cloaks. They're no longer bound, and they're wearing their cloaks, and that didn't get changed either. V'reach nur la adat bahon, and there's no smell. Something gets put in the fire, even if it just smells hot, like it changes the odor of things. And there was no sign, no visible sign, and no reach that indicated that these 3 people had just walked out of this fiery furnace. Anei Nebuchadnezzar v'amar berich elakahon di Shadrach, Meshach v'Abednego di shalach malache v'sheziv la'avdohi di hit rechitzu alohi. So he says, blessed is their God, meaning the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, who sent his angel and saved his servants who trusted in him. That's this hitrachitzu, is but who had bitachon, who had faith in, they put their trust in God. Milat malcha shanio v'yahavu gashmehon dila yiflachun v'la yiskadun l'kol ela lahen leila hahon. Kahon, I guess. And the word of the king, they basically ignored, and they gave their bodies, right? This is, instead of, like I said, it wasn't Moser Nefesh, they were Moser Guf, okay? They gave their bodies in order that they should not worship nor prostrate themselves to any god other than to their God. And so this, right, this was Rabbi Yochanan's definition of what it means to be a Jew. Umini sim te'em di kol am u'melashan di yemar shalu al hehon di Shadrach Meshach v'Abednego hadamin yit aved ubete nevale yishtave kol kavel di la itai el ela achan di ikol hatala kidna. And now Nebuchadnezzar has like a one-track mind about putting gross ends to people, basically. He says, whoever thinks, right, seem to aim is like seem lev, even though it's not lev, it's to aim is like reason, siba, but it's like whoever thinks that out of all the nations and all the peoples and all the language groupings, etc., anybody who would say any kind of bizayon about the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, hadami nitaved, it not like we use the phrase like their blood is on their own heads, but no, it's hadami nitaved. We heard this before when he was angry at all of the wise, various kinds of sages that he had because they weren't able to recover his dream, and there's a noise outside. I'm sorry, it's distracting me. That they weren't able to recover his dream, and they weren't able to give a meaning to his dream because, of course, they didn't know what the dream was. So there, he said, "Dami nitaved," that they're going to be cut up into little pieces, so lots of bloody pieces, right? They'll be made bloody, as in cut them into pieces, and their house will be nevele yishtave. So I think that time it will be their houses will be raised and made desolate. And anybody who says the la itai, they shouldn't say anything negative about that there, because there's no, basically, because he says all of this, kol kavel, all of this, why? Because there's no other God who's capable of saving Kidna like this one. So therefore, don't you talk bad about HaKadosh Baruch Hu, because if you talk bad about HaKadosh Baruch Hu, I'm going to cut you up and I'm going to destroy your house. Okay? V'dayin malka hatzlach l'Shadrach, Meshach, v'Abednego b'medinat Bavel. And then the king, hatzlach is our word for success. The Meforshim all translated as hitiv. He gave them money. He gave them even more kavod than what they had before in all of the country of Bavel. I have like one more minute and I have 3 more psukim, but then that's the end of the chapter. So I'm going to finish it off. Nebuchadnezzar Malka, l'kol amaya umaya lishnaya, di dairim b'kol ara shlamchon yiske. So Nebuchadnezzar, the king, to all of the peoples and the nations and the languages that live in the entire land, there should be great peace unto you. Okay? This is the Sagi, because Sagi is spelled with the sin in the older Aramaic. It's spelled with a samach later on when we talk about Sagi Nahor and something like that. That's always spelled with a samach, but in the older Aramaic, it was spelled with a sin. Ataya v'timhaya di avad imi alaka ilah shafar kadamai lahachavaya. Come and be amazed at what the Most High God has done as before me to lahachavaya, to experience. Atohi kama ravivin v'timhohi kama takifin malchute malchut alam v'shaltane im dar v'dar. So these many signs and wonders and takifin is it has to do with strength, but it's I'm not translating it properly. The English has all of a sudden escaped me on that one word. And of his kingdom, the how strong, etc. And his kingdom, Malchut Alam. His kingdom is a kingdom forever. V'shaltane imdar v'dar, and his rule is for door v'dor. Okay, generation upon generation. This is. We saw this before. Nebuchadnezzar gets it. Okay, he's not really an idol worshiper. He's not really he's smarter than that. Okay, and he gets it, and he acknowledges God, but then he wants to get paid off of it and get loose of it. He doesn't really want to be in a continuing, ongoing relationship with HaKadosh Baruch Hu. But he acknowledges, he gets it and he acknowledges it, and that's where he's holding. Okay, so we have a couple of things to discuss next week about who his fourth figure was, and various. There are midrashim about it. There's Gemara about it, etc. The Gemara is also it's also medrash, but. And we'll see what the Raman Valley has to offer us, etc. So, questions? Thank you for joining me.
Glad I got in for such an exciting episode.
Oh yeah, it is. It's
Mamaj. I'm sorry, I was late, but I came in at a very momentous time in the story.
Yeah. I mean, and the stories are great stories. Many of us know them, but then we don't necessarily, we don't necessarily think about them. I meant to say, and I didn't, there's some of the details in here that were not part of the version that I learned when I was a kid. Okay. The business about the flames shooting out and killing the people who tried to put them in to the fire. I think they left that out. I think I had a sanitized version of the story.
Dramatizing.
Yeah, I guess. I mean, I had a kids version, kids version, so they leave out some of those kinds of details. And to be honest, I also don't remember about the figure, although I have a feeling that must have been in there. It's hard to believe. Well, I don't know. I don't remember in the kids version that I learned many, many, many years ago. I don't remember hearing about that fourth figure. so that I've learned more about this past year than I had learned prior. So
very amazing.
Yeah, that's
great.
Yeah, it's pretty cool stuff. Okay, so I'm going to at least stop the share and stop the live stream and stuff.
Okay.